Today we're going to be in Joshua chapter 3 and chapter 4. One of the hard things about doing a series like we're doing is you have to skip so much. So many things that are important. You think, oh man, we need to put this here, but we don't. That's not going to fit in the big picture of the way we're doing things. So we're jumping from the Passover. Now we're going to move forward to Israel entering the Promised Land. So I want you to imagine that you've messed up. You had the chance to do something good, but you were afraid to take it, and you've regretted it ever since. Or let's change the scenario. And this time, it's not that you didn't do something that you should have done or wished you'd done, but that you did something that you wish you hadn't done. And you've been paying the price of that decision for a long time. Or let me change the scenario one more time. You were sitting in church, and you heard God speak to you. And you knew God was speaking to you. But for whatever reason, pride or fear or doubt, you didn't do anything about it. So in biblical terminology, you hardened your heart. You pushed it aside, and you've been in church ever since, but you're not sure that you've ever heard God speak to you again. In all the scenarios, do you get a do-over? Are there second chances? This isn't an academic question. So people who have been divorced and spurned, and people who have been fired, people who have been addicted and been thoughtless and been stupid, people want to know. Which is just another way of saying, we want to know. Are there second chances? I think the answer to that question is this. When another chance, whether the second chance or the 100th chance, will help, it'll be given. See, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is also the God of second chances. So think through the scriptures for a moment. Think of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, his conscience was disabled by his greed, but he got a second chance. His conscience was restored, his relationships were mended, he was saved. Or Peter, he denied Jesus in his pride and fear, but he got the chance later on to confess Jesus in front of the people that he had feared. Or Paul. So Paul the extremist, the Pharisee, who imprisoned Christians when they refused to deny Jesus. Later, Paul got the chance to be imprisoned because he refused to deny Jesus. So in our text today, we're going to see the nation of Israel get a second chance. The people are standing on the border of the land of promise, waiting for a prearranged signal. So it's kind of like the settlers in 1889 who waited on the border of the Indian territories for the signal that began the Oklahoma land run. They're waiting for a signal, only they're not just homesteading. On the other side of this border, the Promised Land border, are mortal enemies. And the signal to enter in that land is the signal to go to war. Israel had been in that situation 38 years earlier. They could have entered the Promised Land then, but they were too afraid. They disobeyed God because they didn't trust him to take care of them. Does that sound familiar? We saw something just like that in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve disobeyed God for the same reason. Now, the people have come to the eastern border of the Promised Land. They're in the Jordan River Valley, and they're waiting for Joshua's orders. These are 3 tense days. Everyone knows that they're going into battle and that some of them won't survive. But before the battle could even be joined, they had to cross the river, and how on earth were they going to do that? They couldn't swim it. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of them, including old people and babies. They couldn't raft it. I mean, it would take a month of 12-hour days to build enough rafts to ferry people across. And where in these chalk flats are they going to find wood to build 1,000 rafts? While they waited, so this is Joshua 3, verses 2 through 4, military officers go throughout this sprawling camp, issuing orders that have come down from Joshua. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the priests who are Levites carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you've never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 1,000 yards between you and the ark. Don't go near it. At Sinai, the people, if you remember a few weeks ago, the people were to consecrate themselves in preparation for what God was about to do. Now, this is verse 5, Joshua 3:5. Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. At the very least, consecrating themselves meant taking a bath and changing their clothes. So in our day, we don't think anything of taking a shower or a bath. But for ancient people generally, baths were few and far between. And for Middle Eastern people in particular, water was sparse. So people bathed rarely. Sometimes when they did, it was for spiritual reasons. So a bath and a change of clothes symbolized forgiveness and a clean start with God. That's why Jacob, so this is Jacob on his way back to the promised land. He's been out of the promised land for a long time. On his way back, he has this encounter with God that changed everything for him. And you know what he did? He told his family, take a bath and change your clothes. Or King David, after he confessed his sin with Bathsheba, he took a bath and he changed his clothes. People who see God do amazing things, in Joshua's time or in ours, are the ones who consecrate themselves to God, get the moral dirt out of their lives and clean up. People who don't clean up, who ignore that moral dirt, or worse, they see it but they excuse it, they're probably not going to see God doing things in their lives. He'll just remain an abstract idea to them, not a living person. The military officers told the people to watch the ark and follow it when it moved. So what is this ark the priests are carrying? Noah's ark was a floating zoo, this gigantic boat. That's not what this is. So what is it? It is the Ark of the Covenant. The covenant that God made with Israel at Sinai that we looked at a couple weeks ago. See, the word ark simply means box. Noah's ark was a huge floating box, about the size of a football field in length. This box, the ark, is not so big. It's 3 3/4 feet long. It's about 2 1/4 feet wide. It's about 2 1/4 feet high. It is overlaid with gold, and it contains inside the box the 10 Commandments. Remember, they are the principal terms of the covenant that exists between God and Israel. It was normally kept in a very small room in the tabernacle called the Holy of Holies, or the holiest place. No one ever went in there except the high priest, and he only went in once a year on the Day of Atonement. To the Israelites, the Holy of Holies was the place where God lived among them. And the golden ark of the covenant was his throne. So if you looked at the ark, on either side of the ark are golden cherubim made out of pure gold that hover over the ark. And in between is what was known as the mercy seat. That's also thought of as the throne from which God issues his mercy. Now, people knew that God doesn't fit in there. He's bigger than that. The whole of the heavens and earth can't contain him. Still, it is in the Holy of Holies and from the Ark of the Covenant that God makes himself known. Now, remember that Israel has been a nation of nomads for 40 years. Each time they broke camp to travel some new place, they took down the tabernacle, lots of work, and they removed the ark. The priests, the ark was made so that it had rings attached to it on either side. The priests would slide poles through those rings to lift it so that no one ever touched the Ark of the Covenant itself. When they were ready to set out, each time they broke camp and were ready to set out, Moses would say, "Rise up, Lord." And remember, when you see Lord in all caps, that's a proper name. It's not a title. We think it's the name Yahweh. "Rise up, Yahweh. May your enemies be scattered. May your foes flee before you." Then those specially selected priests would lift the ark on their shoulders on the pole and walk in front of the people, and the people would follow. Whenever they came to the place where they would encamp, Moses would shout, "Return, O Lord, to the countless thousands of Israel." And then the ark would be set down and made secure. The people were well acquainted with this practice. It had been going on most of the time that these guys were alive. So when the officers told them to follow the ark, they knew what to do. And in their minds, they are following God himself, just like they've done many times before. But as they stood on the banks of the Jordan, where God was going to lead them was unclear. Would they travel north 15 miles to a place where the river was shallow and they could ford it? Or would they travel south down to the mouth of the Dead Sea where the river was narrow and cross it there? They were going to need to ford the river at some point. No one guessed, though, how that was going to happen. When the signal finally came, the people got into formation. The priests lifted the ark and carried it to the edge of the river. But they didn't turn north or south. They didn't stop. They continued into the river. What are they doing? Taking the Ark of the Covenant, the throne of God, into this muddy, swollen river. It's crazy. So here, I want us to understand, is Israel again. They are where Adam and Eve had been in Eden. They're where Abraham was on Mount Moriah, where you and I have been at times in our lives, in a place that we must choose to trust God or go our own way. Adam and Eve chose not to trust God, and humanity was left desolate. 38 years earlier, Israel chose not to trust God, and they were left to wander the Sinai Peninsula, the wastelands of Midian, and the Negev. And you and I, when we have chosen not to trust God, have brought harm on ourselves and on our families. We've known the consequences of unbelief. Here's Israel back in this situation again, facing the same issue. If anything, it was harder this time. Last time, they had Moses, the hero of Israel, with whom God spoke face to face. Last time, they didn't need to cross a rushing river that threatened to carry them away. Once again, God's instructions don't seem to make any sense. Would they trust him and obey him? Or would they distrust him and come up with their own plan? The people watched as the priest walked tentatively into the river. Now, this river is at flood stage. Mud, there's things flowing down the river. It is flowing fast. The priests walk into the river. I wonder what they were thinking as they felt the force of the current, the water swirling around their ankles and then their knees, possibly up to their waists. And don't forget that Joshua had promised, so this is verse 13, that as soon as the priests stepped into the river, the water flowing from upstream would be cut off. So the priests stepped into the river, up to their ankles, up to their knees, maybe up to their waists, and nothing happened. Now, you might be thinking, no, wait a minute. That's not what the text says. Verse 16 says, the waters upstream stopped flowing as soon as the priest's feet touched the water. You're right, but look at the next part of that verse. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zartan. Now, it's true that the water was diverted the moment the priests obeyed and walked into the river. But Adam was 16 miles upstream. It must have taken a while, maybe a long time, for the waters where they were to recede. So I wonder what those priests thought. We did what we were supposed to do. Why is nothing happening? For them and for us, the hardest thing is not to trust and obey. So understand this. The hardest thing is not to trust and obey. It is to trust and obey and keep on trusting. That's a faith lesson that appears throughout the Bible. Obedience must be immediate. Results may take time. And we might not live long enough to see those results. See, God's people live by God's promises, not by explanations. Explanations, frankly, don't come our way that often. And even when they do, they feed the mind, but not the soul. They don't sustain us. Too often, I'm afraid, people trust God, they obey him, and then give up before they can see the results. Maybe you've done that. You've felt the force of your circumstances the way those priests felt the force of the current. And you were trying to obey God. You forgave the person who hurt you. You stayed with your unloving spouse. You stepped into some ministry position at church where you were needed. You asked forgiveness from someone whom you'd harmed. And you expected that something was going to happen. Things would be right. But nothing happened. And now you're ready to give up. Don't give up. Don't turn back. You've trusted God, now keep trusting and obeying. Now picture this. The priests were carrying the Ark of the Covenant. Ancient Israelites referred to it as the throne of God. It was going into this flooded river. Can you see it? It makes me think of Isaiah 43. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. See, the throne of God ventured into Canaan's raging river. Now, we read that and we're likely to miss something important. Remember that when God rescued Israel from Egypt, he did it in a way over and over again that showed his supremacy over the gods of Egypt. He toyed with Hapi, the god of the Nile. He humiliated Heket, the god who was frequently represented as a frog. He turned the lights out on Ra, the sun god. Well, something similar is happening here at the Jordan. The chief god of this land was Baal. Baal and the other gods were believed to have power over the rivers and the sea. If someone was accused of a serious crime, they would sometimes be thrown into a dangerous river, like the Jordan at flood stage. By throwing such a person into the river, people were giving him to the judgment of the gods. If he drowned, he was guilty. If he didn't drown, the gods declared him innocent. But in this case, it's Israel's God who's put into the swollen river. Will Baal and the gods of Canaan drown him for his insolence? Not this God. He walks on water. He dries up seas with a puff of his breath. The gods of Canaan cower before him. The Lord God is over the gods of Canaan and Egypt and America and everywhere else. He is, as Joshua puts it in verse 11, the Lord of all the earth. This is clearly wide-angle stuff. See, a state of war has been going on since before the Garden of Eden, a spiritual war that will continue until the powers that have set themselves against the Lord God are subdued once and for all. Sometimes when a nation's at war, her people will ask, is God on our side? More often, they'll just assume that God is on their side. But the real question is not, and never has been, whether God is on our side. The real question is always, are we on God's side? That question is posed here. We see it clearly in chapter 5. So in chapter 5, Israel has successfully crossed the river. There is a battle looming on the other side. And Joshua, who has not been, most of these Hebrew people have never been in the promised land. There are only 2 of them left who have ever been there, and one of them is Joshua. He is on the other side of the river, hasn't been there for 38 years, and he's wondering how things have changed. What should his plan of attack be? He mulls these questions over as he walks alone in the woods on the west side of the river. I said a few moments ago, there's salt flats everywhere. There are, except right next to the river, there are thin, scattered woods. He hasn't seen anyone, he hasn't heard anyone, but suddenly he has a feeling that he's not alone. And when he looks up, he sees a redoubtable warrior standing just yards away from him, and he has his sword drawn. With extraordinary courage. It's astounding, the courage that Joshua shows. He approaches this warrior and he challenges him. Are you for us or for our enemies? And the warrior calmly replies, neither. I'm not for you, I am not for your enemies. This warrior was not fighting for Israel, not fighting for Jericho. He's the commander of the Lord's army, referred to in chapter 6 as the Lord himself. You remember when angels appear to people, what happens? They usually fall apart. Joshua approaches this person. Many teachers believe that this was Jesus in a pre-incarnate state. Standing before him, Joshua realizes the issue is not whether the Lord is on our side. The issue is whether we are on his side. And you know what? That's our issue too. It always has been. There's a spiritual war raging around us, but we've become so absorbed in personal and even comfort issues that we feel God has let us down whenever he doesn't do what we want. God can lift us up and teach us to fly, but it will be on the eagle's wings of his great purpose, not on the butterfly wings of our little desires. There's a life for us to live, a battle for us to wage, but we will need courage and faith. The author of Hebrews, thinking of the first time Israel came to the border of the promised land, so 38 years earlier, wrote this: they were not able to enter because of their unbelief. Not because they were too weak or not because they weren't smart enough, but because of their unbelief. It's for that same reason that we fail to enter into God's good and pleasing and perfect will. Unbelief keeps us from the life for which we were made, but it doesn't have to. So hear this. Though you have failed before, you can succeed now. But you must trust God. There are borders to be crossed. There are challenges to be faced. There are second chances to be taken. There are family members and friends and even enemies to be won. Sinful habits to be defeated. and a Christ-like life of love and peace to attain, but you must trust God. So, in the past, you chickened out. You turned your back on God's plan. You found yourself wandering aimlessly in a purposeless life. But God will bring you back. It took 40 years, but he brought Israel back to the border of the promised land and gave them another chance. The good news is that God will bring you back too. The bad news is that when you get back, the challenges will still be there. As scary as ever, and maybe more so. But God will be there too. He will not send you, he will go with you, even go ahead of you. And he will say to you, this is that passage we looked at before, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze, for I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I would say if you have failed in the past, but I know I can remove the if, because we all have. Don't let that stop you from what God has for you in the present.